Welcome to another edition of Small Cap Power Discussions. I'm your host, Jim Gordon. Joining me, great to have him back, is Frank Holmes, Chief Executive and Chief Investment Officer at U.S. Global Investors, which specializes in natural resources and emerging market investing. He is also an author of books like The Gold Watcher, Demystifying Gold. He writes articles, he does blogs, he writes for a number of sites, and he's back with us again. Frank, always a pleasure, and welcome back to Small Cap Power Discussions.
Great to be back, and I can't wait to go for my run because I'm running the half marathon in San Antonio next month. So I got to stay. Sir. I got to keep up with all those millennials that are changing the capital market. So,
well, we talked about that young investment crowd in our last chat. We'll get to them before we wrap things up. But first, let's talk a bit about what just launched, the U.S. Global Sea to Sky Cargo ETF. As I mentioned, just launched. SEA provides investor access to not only global sea shipping industry, but also air cargo. Let's start with air cargo first and go from there.
Well, what we learned from Jets, and just recently, Jets has had almost $300 million in the past week come into it, because of November the 8th is a big date this week when Europe is allowed to fly directly into the US and not wait 14 days in Mexico City or Canada. And recently when I was in Dubai, half flight totally sold out flying from Houston to Dubai, half empty coming back. I was in Sweden last month, same thing, half full going over, half empty coming back. I think that's a big game changer November the 8th. But in that sort of journey of seeing what's taking place in Jets, what we noticed was that the cargo airlines were the best performers during the crisis. You had to move masks, you needed healthcare, you needed flying from Asia. The busiest airport in the world was Anchorage. Everything else was shut down. And they were flying these jets into Europe and into North America and South America to basically deal with COVID. Now, as COVID came out of more people getting vaccinated, and the economy started to heal, and the governments are throwing trillions of dollars into every economy in the world, you saw all of a sudden this backup and this huge demand. And you had, coupled with that 2 years ago, was a UN rule that said basically any ship, dry ship that's carrying, using this crude oil from Venezuela, which is inexpensive to move equipment, your Samsung television and a new refrigerator across the Pacific, it can't go in the ports. It's too much of a carbon problem. So 25% of the 30%, I hear different numbers on it, were wiped out. The world turns around, economy booms, all of a sudden huge supply problems. And then we have what came out of the sort of journey was recognizing that the cargo airlines and cargo shipping are going to have tremendous pricing power for the next 3 years. And being the executive chair of Hive blockchain, I mentioned last year, we were buying all this equipment from China, and we saw what was shipping a bunch of these chips basically go from $13 a kilogram to 110.
Yeah.
So it was going 10% a month. There's inflation coming up on shipping. And the same thing of racks you have to put all your chips into, they came by a ship. Well, they were delayed, and the shipping costs for containers went up 5-fold. So is it over? I don't think so. And anecdotally, I was in Target recently, and they said, buy all the Christmas stuff you can buy now. We have nothing to replace it until the new year. So if you need lights, you go to Walmart, get them now, buy them, because you're not going to be able to go after Thanksgiving. It'll all be gone in America. So I thought that was interesting hearing about the stores don't have the inventory and the backlog. So we launched Sea, and Sea is basically carrying the things we consume and we love that we need, and the higher expensive items come with airlines, and the less and more not as price sensitive, time sensitive come with ships. And I believe it's a huge secular move in the shipment of cargo around the world.
One of the things, sticking with that, Frank, I was thinking earlier that I believe you and I have talked 4 times in the Small Cap Power discussion room since March of 2020. And it's always interesting to me because you always bring something to the table in terms of the pandemic, the lockdowns, everything in the last 18 months, and how it creates new opportunity, as you've just been talking about. And again, everybody's been reading the headlines about the shipping bottlenecks. I was talking to a retail consumer expert friend of mine the other day, and he said he'd love to be able to tell his kids, let's celebrate Christmas next April. Because there aren't things on the shelf, and buy now, as you said. But the thing you always also discuss is bad news can be good news. And as you just mentioned, for investors who have seen the shares of container liners surge in 18 months since we first talked back in March 2020.
Well, a massive run, and especially the South Korean and the Taiwanese shipping have had spectacular moves. But some people think it's all over, and some of the ships that carry iron ore from Australia to China, those Baltic index, that's fallen back greatly because of a geopolitical dispute. But let's not confuse, the world is reflating. The G7 countries function, the finance ministers like a cartel. They're all in synchronized taxation, minimum 15% for all corporations, and they're also printing money collectively. They're all practicing MMT, and it's been phenomenal to stay ahead of it by buying real assets. Housing in the US is up 19%. I think the conservative but big lagging trade is gold. I think that gold is so undervalued. When you take a look at inflation now at 5.4%, if you use some other model such as what measures CPI used in 1980, then inflation is 14%. I feel it's more like 14% when I go to the supermarket or fill up my tank, my gas, and used cars, they're up 30%. So I think this C is for investors to stay ahead of inflation, to stay ahead of these shortages, and you'll make money with it. That's the idea, to anticipate. The other way is to anticipate something that is disruptive, a new technology, like blockchain is being embraced everywhere. And now we're seeing that, the enthusiasm of Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies, it's disruptive. And the use of Ethereum to create DeFi companies, which I love, is the NFT business. And we just made a big investment in a microcap in Vancouver, and NTE.V. And why? They do about 20 million next year in revenue, make $5 million doing icon documentaries. What happens when you take Bruce Lee and you take every little films and you all of a sudden distribute those like a Babe Ruth baseball card? And they have Muhammad Ali, and they have a whole bunch of phenomenal icons. They develop these films, they sell them to Netflix. You and I watch them, but they own the IP. So I think that these things are new ways of looking to stay ahead of new technology. Otherwise, you want to stay ahead of inflation, and buying things like C, I think, help you to stay ahead of inflation. The Jets' big play on Jets was the vaccine play. Some bought Moderna, some bought Pfizer. Buffett jumped out of all the airlines at the very bottom. We know from data points that there's 39,000 Robin Hooders that doubled their money in Jets. So they're not that dumb. And that liquidity called in the ecosystem, the little bits coming in attract more liquidity and more capital. And now airlines, there's been 3 new public issues here that have been very successful for tourism. Canadians can't wait to fly this winter to Tampa, to Miami, to Fort Lauderdale. And what are the airlines have done in the US of small cities in Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New York, flying south to Texas, etc. So we do see these shifts where the airlines are making money. They have tremendous pricing power. You've got to remember, 2.7 million people a day, down to 90,000, back to 2 million. There's still lots of upside in the airlines, and that means you're gonna have to move the cargo to be able to feed all these people, put nice new t-shirts on them. You're gonna get these t-shirts from China. You wanna get them shipped over, we'll put the logo on over here. No, it's Miami. No, it's Fort Lauderdale. We have to get this, so the cargo is gonna be coming over. So you need the cargo ships, and that's part of the ecosystem. So I'm very bullish. And the governments will continue to print the money.
Mentioning your shirt, Frank, we were talking just before we went on air about, I put you and I in the older guy category, but I love the fact that you stay really on track with trends and everything. Just before we go, like you're mentioning your shirt and the reaction you get from that millennial investor. And last time you were on, we talked a bit about the millennial investor. Let's wrap up with a little more discussion about that before we wrap things up.
Well, the millennial not only changed because the millennials ignite what the regulators like to call price discovery. How do you determine the fair value of a security? is price discovery is key to it. Well, if every institution is waiting to say who's got the better price, or I don't know, put a bid up, if you get millennials coming in because they've done all the research and say, jets, it's a classic. Everyone on Wall Street was negative on the airlines. Buffett capitulated and dumped out of all of his airlines. The millennials said every time there's been a global crisis, a year later they double. So they came in and they were right. They're not listening to Wall Street. They're listening to you. They're listening to other people. And it's really important to recognize they listen to podcasts, they listen to YouTube. That's how they capture their information when they're on their Peloton. And I think that they're important in their ecosystem, and they're speculators. If they lose their money speculating, they're young. It's my age. You don't want to lose all your money and do something foolish. But the young kids they're all in speculation. You're seeing this really much in crypto because there's been so many big wins. So Motley Fools in Canada said that $1,000 in 2020 in Hive, you made $41,000. Well, now it's $51,000. How does a stock like Bell Canada compare to that? Yeah. How does any of these big name stocks that very few are giving you a 50 bagger? So it's recognizing, even I think you were mentioning earlier on your site, the best was a crypto stock last year. It was up, a more than 30 bagger for you. And I think that millennials will continue to speculate there. If you look how they do their marketing and advertising, there's many more women, and they're very frisky and risky in their marketing and branding. If you look at Twitter, I mean, you would just say, whoa, but that's what attracts money to the gamers. It's Las Vegas style to relate to the speculation. I got to sit back and smile and say, it's okay. It's their world, but their world is everywhere. There's conferences sold out. There's no micro cap conferences sold out around the world, but there's crypto conferences, which I scratch my head with it. Like, I just can't believe last week in New York, it was $5,000 a ticket for the NFT conference. 5,000 sold out. Scalpers will give you want to pay for it. The same thing now in Miami earlier this year. The whales, it was $15,000 a ticket. I mean, you would never hear that for a big cap, small cap investment conference. But that crypto ecosystem is around the world with 30,000 Ethereum scientists working on it. There's 13,000 Bitcoin nodes. So it is global, and it's recognized that for your listeners. It's very much millennials. Millennials are going to inherit the next 25 years, $10 trillion. They're not afraid of digital. So I think we're moving in that direction, and how blockchain is triple entry accounting is going to be adopted more and more.
He is the Chief Executive and Chief Investment Officer at U.S. Global Investors. He's also an author. He's a journalist. He's a blogger. And I just discovered before we went on, Frank, also a marathon runner. We wish you all well with that next marathon you're doing in your hometown. Frank Holmes, always a pleasure, sir. We always appreciate your insights here in the Small Cap Power Room discussion.
Wheels up.
Thank you, sir. I'm Jim Gordon, and thank you for watching Small Cap Power.